The Hidden Isle is a tarot card-based tabletop RPG by Causa Creations and based loosely on the Forged in the Dark rules paradigm. I say loosely because there are no dice in this game and no management at the team level. The game is played entirely with a standard 78 card tarot deck and a playbook style character sheet. And the game doesn't just use a tarot deck as a cheap gimmick either. The rules actually channel the spirit of tarot, but morph the concept into a playable RPG where your characters have all kinds of internal features and struggles, and they can take damage and die or ascend to greatness in a secret society through their deeds. At the time of this recording, The Hidden Isle is crowdfunding on Kickstarter. I'll leave a link below. In this video, I'm going to walk us through the rules of the game, which are included in the playtest version. I have to warn you up front, this version does not have the complete art and layouts finished, but the actual rules that make up the game are really fascinating. I want to mostly share with you how the rules work and would love to hear your thoughts on how this game would play at the table for you. First, let's take a look at a preview deck of the physical cards that can accompany this game, and then after that we can see all the crazy things that these cards will actually do. If the name Sephiro or this artwork sounds familiar, it's because they're both from an immensely successful Kickstarter in 2021. The tarot board game called Sephiro established the historical fantasy island of Dioscoria and is a fun game that a lot of people have enjoyed. But Causa Creations was able to utilize this very same deck of cards and devise an RPG out of it. The deck itself has a standard 78 card composition. If you're not familiar, that's 22 major arcana cards and 66 minor arcana cards split into 4 suits. It's actually become quite easy to self-publish your own deck of tarot cards these days and have them printed on demand. And a lot of people have done so at this point, but what has ended up happening is that the tarot card market has become flooded with relatively low quality and low effort decks. Actually finding a deck like this one, which has been given the name The Sphere of Heaven, is a pretty rare occurrence. There are 2 reasons for this. The first is that the designer of the cards, George Hobmeier, committed years of research and study into the symbology and history of tarot itself, which goes back centuries and spans all of Asia, Middle East, and Europe. And second, Hobmeier worked with the artists Elliot Baum and Viv Tanner pretty intensely to come up with the concept for each of these cards, sometimes up to 2 weeks on a single card just to get the imagery right. And you can just tell at a glance that a lot of thought was put into these. They are just loaded with intention and precise choice that you don't often see in tarot, at least not consistently. As far as the physical construction, each of the cards is thick and has a matte finish that makes a shushing sound as they slide against each other. The box they come in also has a thick and matte finish with artwork on the inside. Importantly, the deck also comes with a little booklet that briefly explains the history of this particular deck and how it came about, as well as an interpretive treatment of each of the 78 cards. Technically, the deck has 80 cards because there are 2 extra lovers major arcana variants for those opting for a more non-binary depiction of lovers. Just to be clear, this is a deck of tarot cards that you can use in any tarot card reading that utilizes the modern 78 card deck, but they can also be used for the Hidden Isle RPG. And by extension, you can use any modern 78 card tarot deck to play the Hidden Isle RPG. This deck is just one made by the creators of the original Sephiro board game and this RPG, games which both share the same historical fantasy setting. There's really not much pressure to use this particular deck other than the fact that it's exquisite in physical execution and artistic quality. The setting of the game is a 1562 Europe, or 1562 anywhere really. It's a world that is a lot like our own, but with a sort of gothic, occultish underworld everywhere. You play as one of a small band of agents who can wield all kinds of magic imaginable and work for a hidden magical island city-state called Dioscoria. Whatever it is that your band of agents are doing across the world, they are doing it for Dioscoria, which stands for acceptance, justice, advancement of knowledge, and general human progress. Actually, there's not too much in the playtest version about the lore and history of this city, but I was fortunate enough to have the official Sephiro deck, which I just showed you, and the booklet in that box does spend a few pages describing Dioscoria enough that I felt satisfied. It's located somewhere off of the Arabian coast in the Indian Ocean, and it was founded by an Egyptian scholar somewhere between 300 and 30 BC. It's a haven for intellectuals, artists, and thinkers fleeing persecution and oppression. Actually, I'd love to read a deeper treatment of the city, but this is just the playtest version of the game, so I can understand that they didn't want to overemphasize setting details. The point is that your character is a sort of globe-trotting agent of goodness and justice in the 16th century, and you have magic at your disposal. And you work for a secret civilization that exists on a hidden island whose citizenry is about as international and interesting as you can possibly imagine. As far as the rules, this is really the most fascinating aspect of the game. You start with a standard deck of tarot cards. Split this deck into 2 decks. The Pips deck is made up of the Minor Arcana, Pentacles, Swords, Wands, and Cups, from Ace to 10. Then create the Visions deck, which is the 22 Major Arcana as well as the Minor Arcana's court cards, the Pages, Knights, Queens, and Kings. Player characters will use one of 12 skills to overcome any challenge in the game, and those are sorted across the 4 suits. You're expected to apply these skills creatively because taken too literally and they won't apply to all situations. Each PC also has 4 ever-shifting aspects of themselves called ideals, burdens, vices, and virtues. These are described narratively as opposed to predefined, but there are some mechanisms in the game that make each of these ebb and flow. So here's how to resolve any sort of challenge in the game. The example provided in the book is the PC faces a guard in an alleyway and wants to attack with his short sword. Step 1 would be to define the challenge, which in this case would be for the PC to get past the guard. Since he's using his sword, he might use the skirmish skill in this case. Skirmish is under the sword suit, which means that any cards in this counter in that suit are trump cards. The second step is to draw hands. The player in this case would draw 1 card for every point they have in skirmish, plus 1 extra card. The GM, or seer as they're called in this game, would draw 2, 3, or 4 cards depending on if the challenge was deemed easy, medium, or difficult, as well as extra cards for situational or environmental complications. So in this example, the PC has 2 points in skirmish, so draws 2 cards. The guard in the alleyway turns out to be an elite janissary, so the seer draws 4 cards. And the PC has alerted this guard's suspicions earlier in the narrative, so the seer actually draws 1 extra card for that. The third step is to choose a card from your hand and reveal it simultaneously with the seer or player. The card played by the challenger, or the PC in this example, is the challenge card. The fourth step is to sort the outcome, which is not very complicated at all. If 1 card is in the trump suit, which if you remember in this example was swords, and the other card was not, then the trump card wins regardless of its value. Otherwise, the winning card is the one with the higher number, with aces being 11. Ties go to the challenger. There are actually 2 types of success for the challenger. If they won with a trump card and the seer's card was not the trump suit, then the success was considered total. Otherwise, the success is complicated. Anytime there's a failure, the seer can come up with all kinds of things that might happen which worsen the situation for the PC. Taking physical or spiritual harm is really only one of many possibilities, which is pretty important because that tells you what kind of game this is, or rather what kind it is not. Even though you can do violence, failure in a skirmish check does not necessarily result in return violence. The bandwidth of the collaborative storytelling options is fairly wide in this game. There's another layer to the challenge here called fortune cards. After the seer and challenger have revealed their cards initially, any player can play one of the cards from their fortune hand, which is 2 cards that each player gets at the beginning of each play cycle. This fortune card can add to the value of the challenger's initial card and even change its suit. As many players can throw in 1 fortune card in a challenge as the fiction would allow, and they just have to describe how their character is helping the situation. There are also ideals, burdens, vices, and virtues that a character has, and if a player can invoke one of those in the fiction of the moment, they can enhance either their hand or the value of their cards. This may also advance the progress of the aspect itself. Harm is taken to a character's 4 suits. Each suit can take 2 physical or spiritual harm. When a suit has only 1 harm box checked, there is no penalty, but when a suit has 2 harm, you draw 1 fewer card anytime a challenge uses that suit. If all of the harm boxes are full, then the player describes if the character falls unconscious, is captured, dies, or is otherwise removed from the scenario. The seer does not ever kill a PC in this game without the player's consent. So again, you're seeing a departure from traditional GM is God gameplay dynamics and really focusing here on a more modern, persistent, collaborative storytelling relationship between everyone at the table. Player autonomy and ultimately player arcs matter more than hard and fast death mechanics. As you get XP from each session, you can dump them into either one of the 4 tracks for your suit or into the ability track however you like. When a suit track is filled, you can get a skill point in that suit and start the track over. When you fill up the ability track, you get to choose a new ability and start that track over. Okay, here's where things get really interesting and tarot-like in nature. Visions. At the start of each play cycle, the seer gives every player a single vision card. This card represents a brief glimpse of the past, present, or future, and the player can play this vision card at any time during play and describe, well, a vision. The seer then decides if and how this vision gives the character an advantage. This is a very wide open door for players to get creative, and the fact that the seer has vision cards of their own to play means that they can create all kinds of interesting and maybe even later subverted expectations of what's to come. It's an invitation for everyone at the table to create little prophecies and foretellings that may or may not come to pass. Inventory in this game is quantum in nature, meaning if you need it, it's there in your pack and was all along. This only applies to gear that you would have likely packed, not to special or rare item. You can pull this rabbit out of the hat trick 5 times per scenario. Adversaries are any major enemies that the party or hand faces in the narrative, and they can take the form of an individual or an organization. They're actually tracked on a special sheet, and as tensions naturally ramp up between the hand and the adversary progresses. When the first section is cleared on this sheet, the adversary knows the PC group's identity. When the middle section is cleared, their dastardly plot, whatever it might be, enters its final phase before launch and becomes an urgent problem. When the track is full, the adversary's plan is put into motion and must be stopped at all costs. Magic is offered to players in a very open, creative way. There are no mana points, no spell slots, no spell lists, nothing like that. Instead, characters can essentially cast whatever spell they can think of based on the source of the magic and the intensity or scale of the spell itself. In the game, they follow a few steps. First, they choose which proficiency they want to use, such as summoning or transformation, etc. Then the player describes the magical effect or change. One limitation with magic in the setting is that you cannot create matter. For the most part, you can only conjure, manipulate, and change something that already exists. The third step is the seer judges the scale of the spell as described and tells the player the risks and potential consequences of casting. Finally, the player draws a certain number of cards in a so-called channel draw. As they cast spells in different schools or proficiencies, they slowly fill proficiency clocks in those schools of magic and incrementally decrease the difficulty associated with casting in those proficiencies. Here are some suggested proficiencies and effects, but players are not limited to these by any means. And here are the 7 sources of magic listed from most to least powerful in the setting. Seers are meant to take this hierarchy of power into consideration when trying to judge the scale or difficulty of a cast. And here are some more criteria for judging the scale. It's suggested that straightforward spells do not necessarily require a named source. So I guess there is an 8th source that's just floating around everywhere for everyone to power cantrip caliber spells. Here's a fun little reading list for anyone needing inspiration for realistic magic spell descriptions. I like the hint of a forbidden text right here, which comes with a warning about seeking such knowledge. Very Lovecraftian. There is a list of 10 steps that you take to create a character, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I did want to point out some highlights. The first is that the authors ask you not to invent your backstory at character creation, but rather to develop it during play. I know this wouldn't work for everyone in every game, but I love this concept of just pumping the brakes on a character's backstory when rolling up a character, and instead just making it up based on how and what that character does in the actual game session. One other thing I wanted to point out here are abilities, which are taken from whichever class you end up picking. You pick 2 for the start, and these really add a lot of mechanical variety to the gameplay. We'll circle back to abilities in a minute. As far as what your characters do in this game, it's essentially this. All characters start at the arcane headquarters in Diascoria, getting briefed on their mission. They are all members of a cell called a hand, and each hand has a name that is usually an adjective followed by an animal name, like purple sparrows or something like that. They all serve the benign organization 1 term at a time, a period usually lasting 1 year. They follow a code of honor and try to never kill or seriously injure. In any given session, your hand is sent on one mission or another. These missions can take you anywhere in the world thanks to a secret network of ships and a very convenient teleportation system if a place is too far to sail to. And thanks to something called the Speech of Eden, which I guess is a magical charm or something, all agents can speak all languages. So in other words, the game doesn't want you to get bogged down by travel scenes or language barriers with NPCs. So alright, here are the classes and abilities. There are 5 classes in this playtest version: the Occultist, Illusionist, Hunter, Champion, and Prowler. If you take a look at the list of abilities for the Occultist as an example, you can see just how much the game's rules really blossom in terms of variability. An Occultist can do things like manipulate weather, curse people, or quickly become masters of transmutation and transformation. The Hunter possesses a more kinetic and violent set of abilities, which might be the first place a player goes if they're coming fresh from something like Dungeons & Dragons. In a nutshell, the game follows 4 phases of play. This is definitely where you're going to see the strongest resemblance to the Forged in the Dark style of game. There's downtime, which you might actually skip on your very first session. This is where you address vices, which cause harm, manage your contacts, manage ideals and burdens, and do a downtime action as listed here. I should note that drawing a card is often part of these activities in order to provoke and inspire a random idea. For example, if you decide to visit a contact, you do a number of things, but at some point you draw a card to suggest how their life is going or the topic of conversation. The way the cards work in this game like this are very inspirational and straightforward. You can still achieve this with dice, but you'd have to have a bunch of different tables to roll on. In this case, you just draw a card and imagine. Scenario divination is pretty involved, and it's the phase of play where the agents are briefed on their mission. The seer will use cards to come up with various aspects of the mission, including adversary, stakes, goal, and lead, as well as all of the vision cards for the agents. I'm not sure if this little bit will survive its way into the full game, but I got a good chuckle when the authors explained that when the seer is divining the mission through the tarot cards for the players, they should come up with a mystical sounding phrase and make it seem like an esoteric ritual. The example they give is, "Welcome agents, may the fates guide you as blah blah blah." It's an interesting thing to consider about this game. Can the seer actually create a mystical air and feel to the card drawings? Or would it just all seem like cheap hocus pocus with shallow card interpretations? Anyway, like I said, the divination process is fairly involved, described here in these steps. The takeaway here is that this phase really does feel like a tarot reading. I think as long as the seer can interpret the cards quickly and with confidence, then they can sell the spirit of the game to the players and evoke the sensation of mystical divination. As far as the actual action of the game, playing the scenario, this comes right after the divination, and everyone is meant to cut right to the first action scene, Blades in the Dark style. The actual scenario is played out improvisationally, and you make challenge draws anytime they're necessary. Once the scenario is complete, agent relationships are assessed, XP is awarded based on a questionnaire that is a bit wishy-washy in terms of specificity. Then you advance adversaries on the adversary sheet and describe how the world has changed in some way. The setting of this game is supposed to be 1562 or thereabouts, but anywhere in the world. The authors just offer one location in the playtest version, however, and that is Venice. They try to describe the city in objective terms, avoiding what they call exotification. This is a pretty nice overview of the city, broken down into brief descriptions of districts, groups, and other aspects like culture and politics. So here are my thoughts on the Hidden Isle as seen through the free playtest version and not the full version of the game, since that's not out yet as I record this. Need more Dioscoria details. I can understand why they didn't stuff pages and pages of details of the secret city-state of Dioscoria into the playtest document, but I'm really curious to know more about it. I just happened to be lucky to have that booklet that came with the deck of cards, which explained a lot of the island's history and its society, but without that I would have been pretty lost. Look, if my character is risking their life to serve this city-state, I want to have a better idea of the leadership, governance, politics, and maybe even the history and economy of the place. I'm more of a character-centric gamer, so those kinds of details are important to me personally. Punishing to the uninitiated. The fact that you're constantly interpreting tarot cards for all kinds of things in every phase of the game means that players, and especially the seer, would really benefit from knowing the psychological landscape of tarot meanings. Even though tarot has been around for centuries, the symbols and associations are not widespread knowledge. Anyone coming to the table to play this game cold without any knowledge or understanding of basic tarot meanings is going to feel an uncomfortable burden every time they're asked to interpret a card. Let's just take an example from one of the 78 cards, the Emperor. In the Sephiroth deck booklet, it is described in terms of stability, and in the vision guide that actually comes with the playtest, this card is here to help you. This isn't an exact science, but there are some established notions that come with each of these cards, and it takes a bit of reading to get accustomed to this arcane mental landscape. It's not a deal breaker if the players aren't tarot scholars though, as long as the seer has some command of the meanings. And again, the playtest does come with a list of general meanings for each card you'd find in the vision deck, which is really all you need. All tarot. I love that this game isn't just using tarot cards to randomize things, and it isn't cheating by using dice for anything. As much as it can be a burden to learn some basic tarot meanings before or during this game, it just blows the door wide open to all kinds of fun interpretations throughout the play cycle. Open magic. The magic system of basically allowing the player to come up with whatever spells they want within their character's proficiencies is powerful. You always run the risk with this style of play of having murder hobos and aspiring comedians at the table ruining the mood, but that's kind of true of any game. In the best case scenario, creative players will surprise and delight everyone at the table with some cool, unexpected spell effect. And when that sort of thing happens, that is a reminder of why some of us play RPGs rather than video games. Open magic systems like this one here are the epitome of tabletop RPG freedom. The Spheres of Heaven deck. I'm not sure how deep into browsing or collecting tarot cards you've gone personally, but I found that the artwork for the 80 card Spheres of Heaven tarot deck published for the Sephiroth board game, created by Elliot Baum, George Hobmeyer, Viv Tanner, and James Patton, provide pretty much the best imaginable artwork for this game. I understand that art is a very subjective thing, and you may prefer a different style for your deck if you decide to play this game, but I just find the color palette and the illustration style deeply satisfying and evocative of the sort of real-world arcane that this game is shooting for. So yeah, that's all I've got for now. If you want more information on the Hidden Isle, click on the Kickstarter link at the top of this video's description, and if you plan on backing this one, or if you've played this playtest version, let me know down in the comments. Also, let me know if you backed the game Sephiroth from 2021 and if you played that. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching. See ya.